And welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I am your host of this podcast, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. And I am joined here on this beautiful Thursday afternoon by my friend and colleague, Bryan Fischer. It's been a hell of a week, which, of course, we say every week. This has been an especial hell of a week, Bryan. And it's been a challenge because, this is not an original bit. But I joked here that I am one of the rare sports writers that is not actually an attorney. And I know you fall into that same boat. When I worked at SB Nation for a long time, I honest to God think about 1 out of 5 of our bloggers had passed the bar. And like a third of my colleagues had passed the bar. This was a profession that attracted disaffected attorneys. And I bring that up because half of this job now, half of this beat is to talk about legal stuff, and we can pontificate and pretend that we're attorneys and that we know exactly how some of these laws go, or we can ask people who know more of what they're talking about. And I'm excited today that we get to talk to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, I feel like we could definitely teach a 2L contractual law class, at some mid-level law school. I think we're approaching that after between reading, like conference bylaws and trying to sort out NCAA enforcement guidelines and memos, and it has been a lot, and it's been another wild week. But hey, this is just life in the NCAA. And I started joking with somebody last week in Arizona. It's just like this has become a 24/7 type of sport. Again, and
yeah.
Like the NFL certainly has, they have built that brand. They're doing schedule releases on, Thursday night in prime time just to kind of build up the offseason drama. And college football is kind of the same way. There's been a new story seemingly every other day. There's been the wild ones. There's been the kind of esoteric ones. There's just been kind of your normal run-of-the-mill rumors that end up surfacing. And yeah, it has been crazy. And the good news is we have podcasts like this to discuss it. But the other thing is it does keep us up quite late at night.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I honestly think you're right. Like I actually do talk to college classes all of the time. There are schools that use Extra Points as like a textbook supplement or a textbook for their sports management classes. But I've spoken to sports law classes. I don't know if I could teach one, but it is funny. Like if you just think about what we've had to pick up over the last 2 years, both of us who have spent the early parts of our career writing a lot about the football part of college football, and now. I mean, I think just since I started Extra Points, I've had to learn a hell of a lot more about epidemiology than I had expected. Like my biology knowledge was the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And then suddenly I had to talk to so many public health people to do that. I've learned a lot about sports law. I've learned a lot about how media rights work and valuations. Between selling ads myself and getting into the NIL world, I feel like I've picked up at least a couple of credit hours for getting an MBA. Am I forgetting something? I'm sure I probably am. Immigration law, maybe.
Yeah, that has popped up recently. I mean, like it is funny to think about how when you go into school and you think, all right, I'm going to use this degree. I'm going to learn everything I can, and then it's like you go a million different directions right after kind of walking across that stage, and the things you learn over the years in this job, it really does kind of reinforce the folks that do work in college athletics, like how nimble you have to be just to deal with everything that gets thrown your way. And that's not even kind of going into the higher ed realm that I know we both have a little bit of background in as well. And like that is a whole even another level beyond that with additional layers of on the onion, when you're dealing with massive, multi, just large university systems, like the crazy things that you get involved in with that. And so it has been crazy, but it definitely does keep you nimble, and it does keep you learning on a constant basis.
The public policy classes for managing gigantic state institutions, higher education, you're right, all of those things. We're not going to dig into every single non-college sport, non-college football related policy question, but we are happy to talk to an expert who I think is able to give us some very specific updates about sports law, the NCAA's ability to enforce collectives and amateur rules here over the next couple of weeks. We're happy to talk to Mitt Winter, who, in addition to being an attorney that works specifically in the higher education college athletics world, was also a former college athlete himself. He's somebody that follows this world, has been involved with some with athletic departments and collectives and many of these other kind of like third-party groups, and knows the space better than I think almost anybody. So we wanted to bring Mitt on here to help answer some stupid questions, or dumb questions from me, more informed questions from Bryan, to help us really understand what the layman should take away from the last couple of days. All right, wonderful. Mitt, thank you so much for joining us here and lending some credibility to Bryan and I just kind of talking based on things that we read on our phones. Thanks for taking a couple of minutes.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Mitt, why don't we start with this? I have seen some attorneys, some activists, some other writers, I think, write with a complete 100% conviction that there is absolutely nothing the NCAA could possibly do to enforce their initial guidelines from over the summer without being sued and losing. In your esteemed opinion, do you think that is accurate, or do you think that there is some nuance here that may play out on some level?
I think there's definitely some nuance here. So it's not 100% certain that the rules that the NCAA is trying to enforce here now would be declared an antitrust violation. The rules at issue here are different than what was considered in Alston and O'Bannon for a few reasons. Number one, we're talking about rules that are banning third parties from paying athletes. In O'Bannon and Alston, it was talking about what kind of compensation the schools can give to athletes. So to me, that's a big difference. The latter type of rule, the rules relating to what a third party can pay an athlete, those were not an issue. So they were not considered whether they were an antitrust violation or not in those cases. So Alston did leave some room, I believe, for the NCAA to still argue that rules that prohibit boosters from paying athletes as recruiting inducements are still okay under the antitrust laws.
Maybe I get on that note, assuming that there's some potential nuance depending on how various judges might interpret some of that statute, that precedent. So here's a dumb question. Like let's say hypothetically the NCAA puts out this statement here a couple of days ago saying, as a reminder, boosters cannot use these NIL deals as recruiting to induce someone to pick a school, and a month later, they decide to open up an investigation. They declare an athlete ineligible because he very clearly signed a contract that was contingent upon him playing somewhere. There's a lawsuit. I mean, would a judge issue a stay for keeping the NCAA from enforcing any of these rules until the legal process completes, which can take a while? What is the practical risk potential for an athlete while any of this kind of goes through the process?
I don't, assuming that fact scenario plays out and a lawsuit is filed against the NCAA, I don't think a court would enter any sort of injunction preventing the NCAA from enforcing its rules while the lawsuit plays out. That didn't happen in O'Bannon, it didn't happen in Alston. So I don't think it would happen here. So while a case is pending, the NCAA could still be out investigating deals that it believes are recruiting inducements and going through the enforcement process. So yeah, I definitely don't think an injunction would be entered.
And Mitt, obviously a lot of the deals that we've seen with some of the collectives in particular, some of them have kind of been very vague in terms of the actual contractual nature of some of the clauses that they might put in there. I know I've heard about while it's kind of trying to get around the direct payments in terms of inducements to a school, it's obviously like you have to make so many appearances in a certain area during a certain time frame, and that's kind of how they've gotten around it. Have you heard of any other kind of creative language that are coming out that maybe would pique your interest a little bit, but obviously is not really running afoul of some of these new guidelines?
Yeah, I was talking to someone else about this today, and a lot of the contracts that collectives are signing with guys that are kind of right on that line of an inducement or not, they say as long as the athlete attends any NCAA member school or something along those lines. So they don't specify the athlete has to go to a specific school. So trying to get around, that inducement rule that the NCAA has. Even with that, I'm very skeptical that if the NCAA goes and tries to enforce its rule based on one of these deals that has that language in it, that the NCAA is going to say, you're right, because your deal had this language in it. It was not a recruiting inducement. Everyone knows which collectives are affiliated with which schools. So it's pretty easy to infer which school you needed to go to be able to sign this deal or to have this deal offered to you. That argument will be made that, it says they don't have to go to a specific school, but it's pretty easy to infer. Plus, the NCAA will probably, if they do go after one of these deals, they'll have some other evidence that they've gathered that, put it all together and it looks like an inducement.
It would be pretty funny if over the next 6 to 9 months, we get a situation where, Division Street at Oregon is now publicly paying somebody or supporting somebody at Oregon State just because someone decided to call them out on that and they have to demonstrate that precedent. I don't know how likely that is, but it would make me laugh if that's how this goes.
I know. I would love to see that happen if say whatever school it is, they offer a guy a deal and says he doesn't have to go to any school, just any NCAA school, and he signs that deal, but then goes to another school that's not affiliated with that collective. What's going to happen there? It would just be interesting from a lot of different angles. Would they pay him like you just said? Would they try and get out of the deal somehow? It'd be a very interesting situation. Or like you said, would they just go ahead and go through with the deal just to look better under the NCAA's eyes?
Well, I mean, hey, Phil Knight has given a lot of money to his other alma mater, Stanford. So it's definitely possible out there. But I'm curious, we've also seen some mergers in this space, obviously more kind of school specific, a couple FSU ones merge. Is there the possibility that to kind of get around things, you could see some collectives end up merging, or they might keep operations or deals separate just to kind of get around some of the NCAA guidelines that we just saw?
Yeah, it's possible. One thing I've thought that some of the collectives might do is make them totally owned and operated by people who are completely unaffiliated with, Division I school or any school at all, because then you're kind of getting around that rule of, hey, I'm not a booster anymore, so I'm not a booster that's getting involved in the recruiting process. I think that'd be an interesting thing to see if some of the collectives try and do that, or a merger, kind of as you talked about. Then you're not necessarily a booster of a specific school. Would they be considered boosters of multiple schools, though? It's a question that no one's really addressed yet either.
Yeah, I mean, Adidas was, if I was remembering correctly. Here's a gigantic multinational corporation that was supporting dozens of institutions and was classified as a booster. I'm just kind of spitballing here. I mean, maybe there's a world where under some definition that becomes Learfield or JMI or some other big company that deals with dozens of institutions. Then if you're taking those off the table, that really does limit. I mean, we basically have to find Swiss banks to be bagmen, which might be a challenge. Not an impossible one, but a logistical one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen people get creative right off the bat with NIL and collectives and everything. I'm sure other people are going to come up with new ideas to try and work around NCAA rules.
Let me ask you maybe another dumb, just logistical question, because I feel like the three of us have talked to enough people and seen enough of these collective deals to know that deals that are what I think would pass a reasonable assumption of being an inducement, those definitely exist. But I think the three of us also know there aren't a whole lot of NCAA investigators, and this investigation process has never been smooth, even when there's lots of preponderance of evidence. What is the argument for anybody to actually be legitimately worried about an investigation, knowing that none of these have ever gone? They all seem to take 2 or 3 years, and there's just not that many people.
It's a really good question. I think obviously the NCAA is a little understaffed. They, are under-resourced right now. They're not going to be able to go out and investigate every single deal that's right on that inducement borderline that they might hear about, or that someone tells them about. So they're going to have to be really selective in the ones that they choose to investigate and enforce. So chances are, I don't know if anyone has ever put a number on the total number of NIL deals that are out there. But the chances are that if your deal is the one that's going to be investigated, percentage-wise, is probably pretty small. So, if you wanted to take your chances, mathematically, your chances are probably pretty good that you're not going to get investigated, as long as you're, staying under the radar somehow. I don't think if you're out there in the media telling people about the deals that you've signed, that's going to help your chances at all. And I would say that those deals that are, have already been talked about a lot in the media, or maybe talked about more in the media, are probably more likely to get investigated than other deals.
This is bad news for us, because I think I want to go ahead and speak for Bryan. We would like people to tell us about their deals. We would like them to leak things to us, even if it is potentially embarrassing.
Yeah.
I know, like the defense attorney rule is like, shutting up is free. Like that is something that would probably help you, but we're not really dealing with the class of people that's super good about doing that.
Yeah.
What's the fun of being a bagman if you can't let everybody know you're being a bagman? There was something else. I think actually you kind of raised a very interesting point. It's a little bit unrelated, but I'd just be curious to know what you think about it. Is there any way of knowing really how big this market actually is? I mean, we can go, like, I filed dozens and dozens of open records requests for the compliance forms that athletes send to their compliance departments. And they tell me that might only be 20%, 25% of the total deals. And a lot of the compliance stuff isn't necessarily recorded either. Mm-hmm. Is there any way to reasonably estimate the size of the NIL market, either market-driven NIL or just all of it?
I think it's really hard. Obviously, there are a significant number of deals that have been done through marketplaces like Open Doors, Influencer, Icon Source, No Cap, other ones like that. So they would have those numbers, and you could, get a reasonable idea if you use those numbers. But there are also a lot of deals not going through those marketplaces, especially some of these collective deals. And as you alluded to, a lot of the deals, even though they're all supposed to be disclosed, are not being disclosed. And I would assume that a lot of these ones that are on the line of being an inducement are probably not being disclosed, because I have a hard time imagining that schools would be signing off as okay on a lot of these deals. So I do think it's really hard to get a true handle on how many deals are being signed and the value of all these deals, unless people are going to start sharing all that information, which has become more unlikely.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah.
Kind of going back to that enforcement point, though. I mean, if you were advising a student athlete who, say, enforcement's knocked on the door, they said they wanted to talk with them. I mean, how would you advise them? Obviously, they might have signed some deals with collectives. They might have understood their, under the table or over the table with some winks that there might have been some inducements there. But what would you kind of advise them when they go into that meeting with the NCAA enforcement, not only to say, but also turn over? Like, I mean, would they be compelled to kind of turn over the contracts they ended up signing as part of these NIL deals?
Yeah, based on what the NCAA said in their memo they issued on Monday, I would tell them to give the NCAA as much information as they're asking for, because based on what I read in that memo, they're not trying to declare athletes ineligible by going out and doing these investigations. So if the athlete wants to, stay eligible, they're basically giving them immunity as long as they're sharing the information that they have. So, just from a representing the athlete standpoint, I would tell them to, share the information, share, text, emails, whatever it is that you have, and just don't hide stuff, because it's going to be worse for you if you try and hide something, or if you lie and later on they find out that you lied or were hiding information. That would be a worse situation for you than just telling the truth, and someone else who's the bad actor gets in trouble, but you get to stay eligible.
I definitely think it's great advice to follow instructions the first time, and maybe, not habitually step over lines when authority figures have asked you not to. I was talking to my daughter. That wasn't actually talking to athletes there. No, I understand that, but you know, I just for the benefits of our audience, if I'm a football player who definitely signed an inducement related contract, and the NCAA says, we don't want you, we want the boosters, come talk to us, and you say, as the football player, no, you said you don't want to take away my eligibility, like I dare you, then don't do it. There's a risk you as an attorney, you'd be concerned the NCAA could say, okay, then I'm going to take away your eligibility. Because it seems like, if I was to be cynical, looking at the last couple of major infractions cases, I don't know what the NCAA has created a great incentive to cooperate, given how some of the programs that did cooperate were ultimately punished, you know?
True. If I was representing the school instead of the athlete, I would maybe give them different advice on what to do. And especially if I was representing the booster or collective, that would be different than if I was just representing the athlete. But I think from the athlete standpoint, and this is all assuming that before the NCAA comes to have that meeting with the athlete, that you have a written assurance from the NCAA that no matter what information this athlete shares with you, he's not going to be declared ineligible. I would want to have that all in writing from the NCAA before sharing any information.
That's good to know.
But I think this topic is a very interesting one. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. It creates all kinds of conflicts of interest among collectives, boosters, and the athletes, the schools and the collectives and the boosters, and the athlete and the school. Because the boosters and collectives don't want the athlete to share any incriminating information. The school might not want them to share all of the information they have, especially if, you know, one of the coaches at the school was somehow involved, acting as an intermediary with the collective or doing whatever with the collective. So it's, you know, I think it's important for athletes, if they do find themselves in a situation like this, to have someone representing them. Whether that's an attorney, agent, parent, somebody who's just looking out for them, because if you're relying on the collective to represent you or your school to represent you, there's too many conflicts of interest there.
This is a great point. This is something I'm trying to really wrap my arms around in general, I think, over the last couple of months, because everything you're describing there is a great point. I'm seeing this even in the agent space with some of these firms where coaches, the same agent might represent a coach and a player, and they're trying to use those relationships to help their client by bolstering their roster, to the detriment of the athlete's long-term earning potential. You have the interest of the collective and the interest of the athlete might not always be in the same place, which I keep coming back to, who is the person here that has the highest amount of risk and the least capacity to analyze that risk? It seems to be the athlete. Among anything, if you have it, you would want somebody who's outside of this whole ecosystem, who's only responsible for you. Given that, I think you're right. I don't know if you can trust anybody else to really do that when the chips really come down.
Yeah, a school can give you, advice, but again, the school's interests aren't necessarily aligned with yours. They could, have an attorney on staff or someone that they work with who's outside counsel that they could have represent you. But I would want to have independent counsel if I was an athlete.
And we've obviously heard a lot about these deals just in terms of how lengthy they are as well. We've heard multi-year deals being handed out. We've obviously heard some on kind of more the single year deal. Do you think maybe the ones that are kind of for an extended amount of time, whether they're covering an athlete's entire tenure at a particular school or obviously during their kind of college career, are those the ones that you think maybe the NCAA is going to look a little bit closer at because they are just the length would kind of inform you in terms of, hey, they're tying them to a school?
Yeah, I would say the length and, dollar amounts that they hear about are probably the ones that they would be the most interested in investigating and opening up enforcement cases on. Just for the reasons that you gave, they look more like an employment contract than in some of these other ones that are being called NIL deals. So those would be likely ones they would, want to investigate.
And is there anything that really the NCAA can kind of do in terms of punishments? Obviously, they've kind of talked about disassociation, but like, Reggie Bush was disassociated from USC for a decade, and then he's back, not only on set for Fox, but he's back doing things, and they're doing promotional things. So it's kind of a pretty toothless punishment for a lot of them. I guess you might not have your box seats for a couple of years if you're have a suite or something like that. But I mean, is there anything else that the NCAA can, within their kind of mechanisms, that they could do to kind of enforce some of these things or put some teeth into things?
Not with the boosters or collectives. All they can really do is make the schools disassociate with those boosters, but they don't have any other authority over an outside third party. I think the most effective thing for the NCAA to do is to sanction, and what I've heard talked about is sanction the schools with significant financial penalties. That's what Gene Smith and others have talked about as a potential way to address this. Because if the schools are actually getting severely punished, probably really quickly, they're going to go over to these collectives and boosters and say, hey guys, knock this off. We know that you think you're helping us out, but it's not helping us out if we are getting fined significant amounts of money that are actually harming our athletics program. It remains to be seen whether that'll happen and how quickly it would happen. It would have to be a pretty fast process for it to actually help and matter. But that's what some people have in mind as one way to address this, but who knows if that'll happen.
Let me ask you maybe one last big question, because Lord knows this has been the major topic that's captured the interest of the entire college sports media ecosystem and analyst ecosystem. And there's been a lot of important talking points that we've gone over, and I think our colleagues in this industry have gone over. Is there anything that because I know you read a lot of this stuff, from your vantage point, is there anything that you think people like Bryan and I are missing when we're talking about NIL, when they're talking about the NCAA's like enforcement structure, or about what questions we should be asking with some of these deals and contracts?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. There have been so many angles that have been covered on all of this already.
It has fundamentally broken my brain. More. I think more than realignment, more than satellite camps, more than any coaching search and these other things like this. This has thrown me for a different loop, which is why I ask, because I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's kind of been talked about a little bit, but hasn't been covered in depth, at least that I've seen, is how involved are the schools or their coaches or somebody else in the athletic department. How involved are they in actually talking and working with the collectives? Because we know that the collectives are targeting certain players, and I find it hard to believe that in all those instances, they're just doing it because, they read in the newspaper that, the school we're trying to support is recruiting this player, and then they reach out to them on their own. I'd be interested to see what kind of communications there have been between coaches and collectives or other people at schools and the collectives. And I don't know if there's a good way to get that information, or if anybody would talk about that. And, the coaches aren't going to volunteer up that information. Collectives probably wouldn't either. But I'd be interested in that. And I don't think that's something that's been covered in depth. Maybe that's because it's so hard to get that information.
Well, I mean, coaches have been kind of doing just that, for years now. I mean, this is no secret to them. It's obviously been under the table, then it's just kind of over the table with NIL. But, if you are a coach out there, couldn't you essentially claim, if you made a phone call to a booster, hey, we were just talking about some donation you were having, or the season ticket sales, like that those kind of conversations go on all the time, and schools encourage it. You want your top end boosters to talk to your football coach so you can get $1 million donation. Like I would imagine that for the school's part, you can almost claim a little innocence and be like, they were not talking about anything that you claimed, and that bar to prove that on the NCAA's part would be significantly high, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. And that's another reason why these enforcement cases for the NCAA are so hard. They don't have subpoena power like if it's a court case. They can't go get text messages. They can't depose the boosters, the collectives. They can't subpoena people. So it makes it really hard to gather information. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, yeah, I was just thinking like those are kind of conversations that aren't happening on the official foil phones that I can get involved with. And I think you're right. I've also been told that there are a couple of places where, quite frankly, the athletic director and the coach do not love the people who are running some of these collectives.
Yeah.
And so not only are they not working hand in glove, there may be like actual an antagonistic relationship. And
that's another interesting thing that people haven't, covered a lot. Now, are there some antagonistic relationships between the collectives and the schools? That's an interesting angle as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about, as it's been kind of explained to me, if I'm sitting in the AD chair, if you're lucky, you know that you're going to be aligned 100% on values with the people running your collectives. But sometimes it's about power. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's about somebody else who now is a shadow general manager and has goals that are not aligned with yours. And maybe the AD and the coach know that, Booster, and they just think he's a real son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing happens too. That tracking that nationwide, I think, is outside the investigative capacity of what Bryan and I can do.
Yeah.
But that's definitely something I think we'll want to keep an eye on.
There are a lot of Buddy Garrities out there. Let me say that.
Yeah.
If there was some way that someone was able to listen in on these phone calls or sit in these meetings between collectives and coaches or whoever, that would make an amazing story.
Well, folks, my email is matt@extrapointsmb.com. You can DM me for my phone number. I'm on Signal. If I have a PO box if you want to mail me something. And I say this on a lot of podcast episodes. You joke about it. People have mailed me stuff. It wasn't as interesting as I hoped it would be, but that doesn't mean that the next batch won't be. Mitt, thank you so much for hopping on here and helping to clarify a few things here for us and our audience. You've been extremely helpful. I'm sure we'll be talking again later on.
No problem. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. I want to very quickly unpack what Mitt was just talking about. But before I do, I would be remiss if I did not take this time to tell you about our favorite sponsor, Home Field Apparel, because there's some very big news happening here with our friends at Home Field Apparel. We have another season of Big News Saturday coming, which means there's not that many heavyweight brands left that you can't find on homefieldapparel.com. We're going to get one of them, a real wampin, this Saturday with the addition of our friends, the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I have seen one of these designs. I have not seen all of them, but just based on that one, I would say, once again, the good brand has made some stuff that you're going to want to buy, even if you're like me and have no affiliation with the University of Arkansas whatsoever. I've been to Fayetteville once. I've been to the state, I think, twice in my life. That's not a strong enough connection to steal some valor, but they're good shirts. And I know some of the other schools later this season. I don't know all of them with the exact order yet, but I do know that a couple, there's some other very exciting brands coming very soon.
Well, in the words of Sam Pittman, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. That would be, there it was.
We could have paused for the dramatic effect. I probably could have dropped in the actual soundbite from Sam down the road. But hey, it is a great collection, and I think not only Arkansas fans will be excited about it, but I think everybody else will be excited about what's to come, because even the refreshes recently that have been off the mark. There's a new Burrow shirt from Colorado School of Mines that's turned into a sweatshirt that I have definitely had my eye on. There's some brand refreshes for a couple new shirts for some other schools. So it's like Home Field Apparel. That is certainly where it's at, and no better place to save that 15% than when you're adding quite a few things to your cart.
Yeah, that promo code to save 15% is extra points to get everything. I saw the blaster hoodie, and as you know how I feel about cartoon animals and explosives paired together, A++. But it's also been like 90 degrees here for the last week, and so
it's tough to order the hoodie.
It's tough to order the hoodie. I'm rocking the Illinois shirt today. Did I go to Illinois? Nope. But I feel like when in Rome. I do live in Illinois now. I guess I pay taxes to help support the University of Illinois, so I guess I can buy the shirt. And of course, if you are a university official or a conference official or somebody that has owns collegiate akin intellectual property, drop me an email at matt@extrapointsnb.com if you would like me to put you in touch with a good brand about getting your stuff on there too. We shouldn't let the Illinois and the Arkansas and the Florida States have all of the fun. There are plenty of mid and low majors that have really cool, compelling shirts that have sold quite a bit. And there's no reason to let everybody else be one of those. Bryan, I joked about this a little bit in our conversation with Mitt, and which I really did think was super instructive and something I learned here from. But trying to track this story really has broken my brain a little bit. And I feel like I might have one big column left for early next week. And then just for me, I think I kind of want to let NIL go for a couple more weeks at the very least to kind of see how things go, because this is so much more than a recruiting story. It's a finance story. It's a business story. It's a legal story. It's a philosophical story. And everybody involved is selling something, which makes it really kind of hard. And we don't have good information, which I think makes it hard to really kind of parse through what's really happening, you know?
Well, I think the NIL stories are still going to rope you back into to thinking about them, even if you want to kind of push them off to the side. Just the nature of things happening right now. And look, I mean, the overall thing about NIL is the crazy part is, like, these are still interim guidance. You know, there's going to be a report that's going to be done later in the summer. There could still be further restrictions and further guidelines put on things. Could be further changes, and who knows? Maybe all that lobbying that Greg Sankey and George Kavkov and Lead One and all the others that have been doing in Washington, maybe it ends up producing some sort of bill, you know, in Congress. I think we both kind of doubt that will end up happening, but it's in the realm of possibilities at least. So this is a constantly evolving space, and I think we're all both on the same page too. We're going to see some more mergers in this space. We're going to see some big changes in terms of how schools deal with things, like you know, even the state laws themselves are changing you know, quite rapidly the last couple of months. So
happening right here in Illinois too. I would expect.
Yeah, it's like there's everything on the docket, and again, getting back to, you got to be nimble in this space. That includes coaches, that includes ADs, that includes development staff, that includes people that are involved with these boosters and collectives, and like it is a constantly changing space, and the fans need to be aware of that too. And you know, I know it's been difficult. We discuss these, we debate these. I know fans say, I don't want to get involved with the players when they're getting paid, but you know what? When the games roll around, you know, come September, you know, come late August, and training camp is going on, like you're going to get back into the flow of things. You know, you'll have some more normal rhythms. Those games will still be played. You'll still end up watching and seeing the I getting dotted, you know, there at Ohio Stadium, or you know, whatever you're tuning in for. Like you're going to be excited to have the football season, a new basketball season. You know, whatever sport you might be interested in following, you'll get back into things. And this is just a bit of an off-season distraction, but one that again is constantly evolving, and one we're going to have to keep talking about here on this podcast.
Yeah, I think that will be true for a lot of people. I don't know if this is just me being too conservative, or because I've been online too much. I don't know if I'm willing to, if I know, like, yeah, that'll definitely happen for everybody. I mean, I think that happened last year. It would be difficult to find too many fans who saw NIL over the last football season and said, like, I saw someone do an ad for Buffalo Wild Wings, I'm out. Like, no, it would be easier to argue where this was more additive than one that detracted from everything. We'll see, because there's obviously been a lot more roster transition tied to this than there was last year. The not to drive this into a ditch right before we kind of wrap up here, but the comparison that I've been thinking so much about over the last 72 hours between, like, with this space, is with crypto. And part of that is you had a whole kind of industry that was basically built to hype up the money that can be made in this world, or the size of this potential market. I think most people knew that, upon a careful inspection of some of the products and some of the contracts involved, that this doesn't pass the sniffs test. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of garbage, and also a sense that, you know, maybe we're not even really sure who this is actually for. And we're seeing that the crypto world face some really gigantic structural shocks and corrections, and that's one that's going to force a lot of people, like real people, not like hedge funds, but real people, to lose a lot of money. And I don't think it's a one-to-one relationship, but we're looking at markets where there's not really strong rules, strong reporting, strong information. A lot of the people that write about it are conflicted in some capacity, and I have some empathy for someone who would even say, Matt, that kind of includes you. Like, well, I mean, maybe a little bit. I get how you might look at that and say, screw it. I don't want it. I still processing this, but I think there's something there. And plus, I mean, like, shit, some of these firms are literally trying to sell NFTs to like raise money to give NIL deals and like launder that deal through like a JPEG of like a drunk leprechaun or something. Like, some of this is very on the nose.
Yeah,
we had like UNC like announced their NFT thing like 2 days before crypto apocalypse. Like that feels like a very college football story.
It is, and I mean, there have been on the field changes that are coming. Like, we'll probably get divisions eliminated for the vast majority of leagues to where you're kind of matching, 1 versus 2. So like there are some on field kind of relevant discussions that are still taking place, but I think NIL just kind of is suffocating for a lot of folks. I understand that out there. I think you go back to last fall, and there was kind of a bit of a novelty to hearing or seeing DJ Uyunglele do that Dr. Pepper ad or something like that. And I think there's going to be much more discussion about it on game broadcast. They might say, yeah, he's got a multi-$1,000 deal with a car dealership, or certainly you could see some producers incorporating some of these social media posts where they're like, this guy has a Lamborghini now. It's like this Heisman Trophy winner is now driving a Lamborghini. Like there are some I think aspects that will probably be a little bit more in your face a little bit this fall, as especially the networks kind of get used to things. But it is a brave new world, and I think the thing that you got to keep in mind is you just got to be flexible, be nimble, and listen, those games are still going to get played, and I think that's when we can kind of sit back and relax just a little bit and not end up talking too much about this stuff.
It is weird that our lives have become this thing where the football season itself is where we can relax.
Yeah.
When normally this used to be the time that we would like go on vacation or play FIFA or do other things. Anyway, no one's going to weep for us because we get to talk about sports here for a living. And we get to talk about sports for a living because of the support of people like you. Thank you so much for continuing to support and listen and watch to this show. We have some other guests that we hope to be able to announce very soon. One of the things that Bryan and I have been working on a lot over the past couple of weeks is lining up current athletes to talk about their experiences. And if we're going to talk about NIL or transformation or reform, it's one thing for us to talk to suits. We want to be able to bring on some more athletes. And so we're going to be excited to be able to start announcing those folks in the very near future. Bryan and I are hitting the road in the near future, which will lead to some other, I think, exciting shows. If you enjoy the show, please leave us 5 stars on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or your microwave oven, wherever it is that you happen to get these podcasts. I mean, I think you can do that on some microwaves. And be sure to that you are subscribed to Extra Points, which you can find at extrapointsmb.com. That publishes 5 days a week. 2 of those are free to everybody. The big free story this week was I worked with some developers and we built our own NIL rumor generator. We built this to make fun of some of the ridiculousness in the space. And then, of course, in this week, how Mummy is now having an NIL firm, and a major basketball recruit decided to stay at school so we could sell a Chinese product called Wonder Balls. Like, I can't even make this shit up. But so the sport is impossible to parody, but we could read our best effort on extrapointsmb.com. Did I get everything, Bryan?
I think that's it. And make sure you give us 5 stars if you have a place to rate and review this here podcast. If you're not already signed up for the D1 Ticker, go ahead to d1ticker.com. That's another great place for catching up on all the latest headlines, whether it's NIL, whether it's schedules changing, whether it's some commissioner or some AD said something stupid. All of that is certainly going to be in the D1 Ticker. And it's a lot of the industry is reading as well and laughing along at home along with you.
That's true. I'll just say this only because this is long and we have a bunch of other things to do this Friday. You're getting off easy from me, Gary Barta. I saw what you said. I read what you said. I'm sparing you the 25-minute treatsy here. I'll just leave the show with this. In my humble opinion, Gary Farda. All right. We'll see y'all next week.